It is actually quite likely for you to be misdiagnosed with a mental health condition. I dove into the research and found sentences like this one, claiming that your chance of being misdiagnosed is between 65% and 97%, depending on the type of diagnosis. And there are actually many different studies that make similar claims. In this video, I will explain to you why diagnoses like ADHD, dyslexia, autism, and anxiety can easily be misdiagnosed and how to spot a misdiagnosis. The first reason why this might happen has to do with the way we collect data. Interviews are often part of a mental health diagnosis, and they heavily rely on subjective judgment. In a situation like that, you might not remember correctly what has happened to you in the past, or maybe you really want a diagnosis, and that influences the way you answer certain questions. All of these things can potentially lead to a misdiagnosis. Here is another issue that we're confronted with. We diagnose based on symptoms. If they're present, you get a diagnosis. If not, then you don't. Questions like, what is going on underneath the surface? Or what is the actual cause of these symptoms? Are not part of the process. So something different entirely could create, for example, symptoms that look like ADHD, and that might lead to a misdiagnosis. As if this weren't enough, there's actually more. Let's say somebody is struggling with anxiety. This person has trouble following through with certain things that need to get done. This person is restless and has also trouble paying attention. These three symptoms are also all present in people with ADHD. And this is called symptom overlap, and that can make it actually also difficult to diagnose correctly. For our next point, let's take a look at the autism spectrum. More specifically, at the deficits in social communication, as it is classified in the DSM-5. So on one end of the spectrum, we have failure of normal back and forth conversation. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have reduced sharing of interests and emotions. One challenge that we're confronted with is that we don't exactly know where the spectrum actually begins. And this leads to the question whether reduced sharing of interest can also be a variation of normal behavior. And something that is also not clear is how we can differentiate this from just being introverted, for example. This whole thing makes diagnosing difficult, and it can lead to people being misdiagnosed or people not being diagnosed that really should be. When it comes to autism, women, for example, have been overlooked a lot. Now let's take a look at the signs that you don't want to miss if you think you might be misdiagnosed. So if you're receiving treatment and it's not working, then it might be worth looking for a second opinion. Also, if you experience major life stressors, maybe you move to a different country or you're just in a very challenging situation and it's not being considered, then that would make me skeptical as well. Something else that I would like you to know is that conditions like dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and anxiety, they all run in families. So if none of your family members is struggling with any of the symptoms that you're struggling with, then that would be kind of odd to me. So if that's the case, then I would check it out and maybe get a second opinion. Another thing that you could do is take a look at diagnoses that are often confused with one another. So ADHD can easily be confused with anxiety or with bipolar disorder. According to this study, a child is especially likely to be misdiagnosed if he or she is the youngest in class. Now, anxiety tends to be confused with depression and with OCD, which stands for obsessive-compulsive disorder. And then there's ASD, so autism, and that can be confused with a social anxiety disorder or with ADHD. And lastly, there is dyslexia. And in the case of dyslexia, it might be confused with a simple case of inadequate education or, for example, ADHD. Of course, these things can go both ways. So somebody could be diagnosed with anxiety when in fact it is a case of ADHD. And sometimes you can also have both conditions, so anxiety and ADHD at the same time. Have you ever been misdiagnosed or has a certain condition been overlooked? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching.